Good evening, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Denis Stolyarov. I'm an assistant curator at Pushkin House, and I'm happy to welcome this event tonight. And David Brummell, the chair of Pushkin Club, I believe, is going to present tonight's participants. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Dennis, for that kind introduction. And good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Just to correct one point of fact, I happen to be the chairman of the Great Britain Russia Society. Masha Karp is the chairman of the Pushkin Club, but I'm a long-standing member.
I'm sorry about that.
No, not at all, not at all. May I just introduce our two guest readers? First of all, Lucy Daniels, a former chair of Pushkin Club, who will be reading the translations of Lermontov's poems along with me. And secondly, Alla Gelich, who will be reciting the poems in Russian. And I believe Dennis has kindly made the text of the poems and translations available, so you will be able to follow our reading by reference to the text.
Yeah.
Now, this evening, we are celebrating the life and work of Mikhail Yuryevich Lermontov, Russia's greatest poet after Pushkin, and also a great prose writer. This year is the 180th anniversary of his death. Mikhail Yuryevich Lermontov was born in Moscow on the night of the 2nd to 3rd October 1814. It's thought that his distant forebears were Scottish. One of them, George Lermont, moved to Russia in the 17th century. Lermontov's maternal grandmother, Yelizaveta Alexeyevna Arsenyeva, was a member of the influential Stolypin family.
Oh.
His mother died of consumption when he was 3 years old, so he barely knew her. When his father died some years later, in October 1831, this event caused the teenage Lermontov to meditate on the premature deaths of both his mother and his father, and inspired him at the age of 17 to write his famous poem, The Angel. That's Lermontov's father and his mother. In this beautiful poem, Lermontov recalls songs his mother used to sing to him. We'll now read this poem. The Angel. An angel was flying through the midnight sky, and softly he sang as he flew. And the moon and the stars and the clouds were entranced by his heavenly song. He sang of the blessed who live without sin in the shade of the gardens of heaven. He sang of God's greatness, and pure and unfeigned was his praise. He bore in his arms a young soul for this world of sorrow and tears. And the melody of his song stayed with the young soul, wordless but alive. For a long time, the soul languished on earth, filled with a strange, wondrous desire. And the tedious songs of earth could never quench its longing for the celestial sounds of heaven.
Ангел. По небу полуночи ангел летел, и тихую песню он пел. И месяц, и звезды, и тучи толпой внимали той песни святой. Он пел о блаженстве безгрешных духов под кущами райских садов. О Боге великом он пел, и хвала его непритворна была. Он душу молодую в объятиях нес для мира печали и слез. И звук его песни в душе молодой остался без слов, но живой. И долго на свете томилась она, желанием чудным полна. И звуков небес заменить не могли ей скучные песни земли.
After his mother's death, Lermontov, from the age of 3, was brought up by his grandmother on her estate at Tarkani in Penza province. Mikhail lived with her for the next 10 years. He liked to play with the serf children on the estate. These encounters gave him a great command of Russian vernacular speech and a knowledge of folk songs. In his childhood, he also spent several summers in the Caucasus, which left a deep and lasting impression on him and was to be the subject of many of his works. Lermontov received a thorough early education at home, studying several foreign languages, including English, French, and German. He also studied drawing and became an accomplished painter, as you will see from some of this evening's slides. He was also an excellent musician. In the spring of 1827, when he was 12 years old, Elizaveta Alexeyevna decided that it was time for him to go to school in Moscow, where he attended the nobleman's pension. Mikhail lived in Moscow for the next 5 years and would always consider Moscow his home. He wrote in a letter, "Moscow is my home and always will be. Here I was born. Here I knew much suffering, and here too I was happy." He also wrote later, "Moskva, Moskva, люблю тебя как сын, как русский, сильно, пламенно и нежно." Moscow, Moscow, I love you like a son, like a Russian, strongly, ardently, and tenderly. It was in Moscow that he began to write poetry. Pushkin, Schiller, and Byron were all strong influences on him. Lermontov's first real romantic love, when he was 15 or 16 years old, was Yekaterina Sushkova. He met her in 1830 at dancing classes in Moscow. She was 2 years older than he was. Mikhail developed a passionate infatuation for her, but Yekaterina didn't take him at all seriously and treated him with amused and cool disdain. A significant episode occurred in August 1830. Elizaveta Alexeyevna decided that she and Mikhail should make a pilgrimage to the monastery of the Holy Trinity, about 70 miles from Moscow. Yekaterina and her friend, Alexandra Vereshchagina, went with them. When they arrived, they went into the Trinity Cathedral to pray. At the vaulted porch, a blind beggar stretched out his begging bowl to them. When he heard coins drop into his bowl, he thanked them with tears in his eyes and contrasted their kindness with the callous behavior of some practical jokers who the previous day had dropped stones into his bowl. Lermontov seemed unusually moved by the beggar's words. When they returned to the hospice, Mikhail suddenly started writing very fast. When he had finished, he handed Ekaterina the poem he had just written out. The title of this poem is Nishi, the Beggar, and we're now going to read it.
The Beggar. At the gates of the holy monastery stood a poor, shriveled man, begging for alms. Was all he saw. His suffering was clear to see, and in his outstretched hand, someone placed a stone. So I begged you to love me with bitter tears and grief. And so through your indifference, you destroyed my deepest feelings forever.
Нищий, у врат обители святой стоял просящий подаяние бедняк, иссохший, чуть живой от глада, жажды и страдания. Куска лишь хлеба он просил, и взор являл живую муку. И кто-то камень положил в его протянутую руку. Так я молил твоей любви, слезами горькими, с тоскою. Так чувства лучшие мои обмануты навек тобою.
The poem was coldly received by Ekaterina, who continued to make fun of Mikhail. This was an entirely new situation for him. Previously, he had had everything he wanted, but now he had been emphatically rejected by the first woman he had fallen in love with. In September 1830, Lermontov, who was still only 15, enrolled at Moscow University and opted for the Department of Literature. It was in May of the next year, in 1831, that Lermontov met Natalia Ivanova. She was the orphaned daughter of the well-known Moscow playwright Fyodor Ivanov. Lermontov quickly fell passionately in love with Natalia. He composed over 30 poems to her. Only later did he appreciate that she had not the faintest idea of their meaning. This romance lasted a mere month. It came to a dramatic end at the beginning of June 1831. Lermontov was staying with the Ivanovs for a few days. He bounded into the drawing room to read Natalia some of his new poems, only to be told that she had just become engaged to be married. Mikhail left the room overwhelmed with grief. A powerful change came over him after this unhappy affair. A thirst for revenge took hold of him, like some demonic possession, and was to remain with him for the rest of his life. In 1831, Lermontov got to know the Lapukhin family. They were a prominent family in Moscow. In November of that year, he started to pay attention to the Lapukhin's youngest daughter, Varvara Lapukhina. Unlike his other loves, Varvara was younger. She was 16, Mikhail was now 17. He called her Varinka. She had striking features and large dark eyes, as you can see in this portrait by Lermontov. In this further portrait, Varvara is shown dressed as a nun, and Lermontov is here portraying her as the heroine of his greatest narrative poem, The Demon. Varvara Lapukina was to be the great love of Lermontov's life. His relationship with her, although it was to prove ill-fated, was probably the deepest and most serious of his life. Varvara Lapukina was to feature as Viera in Princess Mary, which is the main story of a hero of our time. It was in the spring of 1832 that Mikhail and Varvara fell in love with each other. Lermontov felt that he had at last found someone who understood him and shared his feelings. He was so happy that he forgot all about his university course. He skipped lectures, and when exam time came round, he simply failed to turn up. Now, Mikhail had already damaged his reputation by his rebellious behavior and his impertinence to the professors. His failure to sit the second year exams was the final straw, and he was duly expelled. He had already set his mind on a literary career, and his grandmother agreed that he should now try his luck at St. Petersburg University. Elizaveta Alexeyevna and Mikhail arrived in the capital in August 1832. Lermontov did not at first take to the new city. He found its straight lines too severe by contrast with Moscow's twisting streets and more exotic architecture. Moreover, it was damp and misty. However, he was inspired by a sail down the river Neva to write Parus, the Sail. This well-known and beautiful poem is a poignant expression of Lermontov's state of mind as he starts a new life in St. Petersburg. We'll now read this poem.
The Sail. A solitary white sail moves through the blue mist of the sea. What is it seeking in far-off lands? What has it left behind? Waves play and the wind whistles while the masthead groans and creaks. Happiness, alas, it does not seek, nor does it wish to flee. Brighter than azure is the sea below. The sunlight glows golden above. But restless of soul, it craves storms, as if in storms it could find peace.
Парус. Белеет парус одинокой в тумане моря голубом. Что ищет он в стране далекой? Что кинул он в краю родном? Играют волны, ветер свищет, и мачта гнется и скрипит. Увы, он счастья не ищет и не от счастья бежит. Под ним струя светлей лазури, над ним луч солнца золотой, а он, мятежный, просит бури, как будто в бурях есть покой.
Life in St. Petersburg, in fact, began with a disappointment for Mikhail. The rector of St. Petersburg University refused to recognize the 2 years he had spent at Moscow University. This was too much for Lermontov. He was horrified at the prospect of another 3 years as a student, and so he abandoned all thoughts of further study. 2 of his relatives had both opted for military careers. Even though by character, temperament, and education, he was singularly ill-fitted for military discipline, Mikhail decided in November 1832 to enroll as a cadet in the Junkers military school. This was a school for the training of officers for the prestigious Life Guards Regiment. But it was just Lermontov's bad luck that his decision to enter the Junkers military school coincided with a tightening of military discipline there. He had very much been looking forward to the literature classes, but these were now abolished. The lessons instead were on purely military matters and drill. Mikhail looked back on Moscow University, which at the time he had not really fully appreciated, with deep nostalgia. The Junkers prayer just about sums up Lermontov's attitude to his military school. We'll now read this poem. The Junkers prayer. Heavenly Father, please save me from tightly cut coats as from the fires of hell. All marchers, let me evade, and don't make me go on parade. When we're out riding, let Alexei's voice, if possible, trouble us as little as possible. One more request I ask you to grant. Permission next Sunday to report late for duty. O Lord Most High, credit me at least with this, that with unnecessary requests, I will not bother you.
Юнкерская молитва. Царю небесный, спаси меня от куртки тесной, как от огня. От маршировки меня избавь, в пародировки меня не ставь. Пускай в манеже Алехин глаз как можно реже тревожит нас. Еще моленье прошу принять. В то воскресенье дай разрешение мне опоздать. Я, Царь Всевышний, хорош уж тем, что просьбой лишней не надоем.
Lermontov called the period he spent at the military school from 1832 to 1834 the 2 terrible years. He found some solace by taking part in the wild carousing of his fellow cadets, and he struck up a close friendship with his relative Alexei Stolypin, who now became his constant companion. Lermontov called him Mongo. In 1834, Lermontov passed out as a cornet in the Hussar Regiment of the Life Guards. His grandmother was delighted and extremely proud of him. He was posted to Tsarskoye Selo, the Tsar's residence just outside St. Petersburg. It was also about this time that Mikhail heard that Alexei Lapukhin, Varvara's brother, was becoming romantically involved with Yekaterina Sushkova, who had by then also moved to St. Petersburg. And he began to be tormented with jealous thoughts about this. A rather bizarre but unfortunate sequence of events then unfolded, which Lermontov later described in his unfinished novel, Princess Ligovskaya. Mikhail Yurievich does not come out of this very well. He himself described how he cynically courted Yekaterina Sushkova. He pretended so well that he was passionately in love with her that in December 1834, she herself fell in love with him. But almost as soon as Yekaterina had declared her love for him, Lermontov started publicly to cool off and became cold and indifferent towards her in society. He then resorted to what he described as a charming ruse. On the 5th of January, 1835, he wrote an anonymous letter addressed to the Sushkov family, in which the anonymous author, in effect, warned Ekaterina of Lermontov's dishonorable intentions. The letter was signed, "Your unknown and devoted friend." The letter had the desired effect, and Lermontov was banned from the Sushkov's house, which was exactly what he had intended. Many years later, Ekaterina described in her memoirs what a terrible ordeal this whole affair had been for her. At a ball later that year, Mikhail coldly ignored Ekaterina. She was desperate for an explanation. When he finally spoke to her, Mikhail brutally revealed that he himself was the author of the anonymous letter and bluntly told Ekaterina as follows: "To put it in a nutshell, I do not love you anymore. Maybe I never even loved you in the first place." So he had achieved his revenge for the humiliation he had suffered when Ekaterina had rejected his love 5 years previously. However, Nemesis was already in train. It was, in fact, on the very same day when Lermontov had set the anonymous letter that he himself received a most unwelcome piece of news. The news was that Varvara Lapukina, who had heard rumors about his courting of Ekaterina Sushkova, was going to marry Nikolai Bakhmetiev, a very rich but portly and uninspiring man who was 16 years older than she was. This was a shattering blow for Mikhail. However, he displayed no apparent remorse or concern for Ekaterina. For a time, Lermontov lost himself in elaborate parties and epic drinking bouts. He ridiculed the idea of happiness in his play Masquerade. This was his chief dramatic work. Altogether, Lermontov wrote 5 plays. Masquerade is the only play he attempted to have published and performed. The play is based on the Othello plot, transferred to the world of high society balls and gaming houses of 19th century St. Petersburg. Masquerade enjoys repertory status in Russian theater and has attracted such directors as Vsevolod Meyerhold. It has also been made into a film. A production by the Vakhtangov Theatre with a stunning musical score by Khachaturian was cancelled just after several performances in 1941 because of the outbreak of war. And Masquerade was performed in Britain in the late 1990s. A crucial event occurred at the end of January 1837, which was to have a great effect on the rest of Lermontov's life. This was the death of Alexander Pushkin on the 29th of January 1837, following his duel with Lieutenant Dantes. The news that Pushkin had died had a huge effect on Lermontov. He realized how much the older poet meant to him. He felt that a great light had gone out from the world. During this time, Lermontov was highly agitated and very unwell, and was as a result confined to his room. In a highly emotional and indignant state, he composed his great poem, Smert Poeta, the death of a poet. He wrote this elegy in a day. The poet expressed both anger and sorrow that the prophet's lips were sealed. Ina gubach yevo, pechat. The poem circulated throughout St. Petersburg like wildfire. Soon there was hardly anyone in the capital who had not read the poem. Lermontov, who was now 22 years old, became famous overnight. He continued, though, to brood on Pushkin's death. He was still unable to leave his room. Then he heard rumors that the St. Petersburg aristocracy were not in fact mourning Pushkin's death at all, but were continuing to spread slanderous lies about him. Another paroxysm of rage took hold of Lermontov. He felt so strongly about Pushkin's death that he wrote another 16 lines to be added to the original poem. We will now read these additional lines from The Death of a Poet.
From The Death of a Poet. And you, arrogant, haughty sons of famous fathers, renowned for their base infamy, whose servile feet have trampled on the remnants of nobler but less favoured families, you greedily crowd around the throne, you butchers of freedom, genius and glory. You hide behind the law, you expect all truth and justice to bow before you. But God's judgment awaits you, sponsors of depravity, and you will not escape his sentence. He cannot be bought for gold. He knows in advance your every thought and deed. It won't help you then to resort to slander. It won't help you anymore, and all your black blood will not wash away the righteous blood of the poet.
А вы, надменные потомки, известной подлостью прославленных отцов, пятою рабскую поправшие обломки, игрою счастья обиженных родов, вы, жадною толпой стоящие у трона, свободы, гения и славы палачи, таитесь вы под сенью закона, пред вами суд и правда, все молчи. Но есть и Божий суд на перстнике разврата. Есть грозный судья, он ждет. Он недоступен звону злата. И мысли, и дела он знает наперед. Тогда напрасно вы прибегнете к злословию. Оно вам не поможет вновь. И вы не смоете всей вашей черной кровью поэта праведную кровь.
Copies of these additional 16 lines flew around St. Petersburg as quickly as the original poem had. The authorities were not amused by what was virtually a direct attack on the aristocracy. Tsar Nicholas I was sent a copy of the second version of the poem by post. This copy bore the anonymous inscription, "A Summons to Revolution." Tsar Nicholas reacted strongly and ordered a rigorous investigation into the case of the impermissible verses. Lermontov's flat in Tsarskoye Selo was searched. His devoted friend, Sviatoslav Raevsky, was accused of distributing copies of the poem, placed under arrest and interrogated. Lermontov was also interrogated. Both were found guilty. Lermontov of writing and Raevsky of circulating subversive literature. By an imperial order, Cornet Lermontov was expelled from the Lifeguard Hussars. He was exiled to the Caucasus to serve, albeit in the same rank, in the Nizhegorodsky Dragoons. His fellow officers were not even allowed to throw a farewell dinner party for him. An even grimmer fate awaited Raevsky for having circulated copies of the poem. He was imprisoned in the Peter and Paul fortress for a month and then banished to the far north. Lermontov left St. Petersburg in late March 1837 and broke his journey to the Caucasus in Moscow. Although at this stage Mikhail was emotionally focused on his lost love Varvara, his thoughts also turned to Ekaterina Sushkova. He still thought of her with tenderness. He thought of one of the lyrics that he had written to Ekaterina in the heyday of his first love and decided to rewrite it. This is the poem Расстались мы, но твой портрет. We parted, but your portrait I still hold. We'll now read this poem. We parted, but your portrait I still hold close to my heart. Like a pale reflection of better times, it brings joy to my soul. And even though I gave myself to new passions, I am still unable to part with it. A temple abandoned is still a temple. An idol overthrown is still a god.
Расстались мы, но твой портрет я на груди моей храню. Как бледный призрак лучших лет, он душу радует мою. И новым, преданный страстям, я разлюбить его не мог. Так храм оставленный, все храм. Кумир поверженный, все Бог.
It was also during his short stay in Moscow in March 1837 that he wrote the famous patriotic epic Borodino. As we know, this poem inspired Tolstoy to write War and Peace.
Oh.
During his stay in Moscow, Lermontov made a point of visiting his old fellow student in the Junkers school and friend, Nikolai Martynov, before Martynov left to join his regiment in the Caucasus. When the time subsequently came for Lermontov to bid his own farewells, Martynov's father asked him to deliver a bulky envelope containing 300 rubles and letters from the family to Martynov. Mikhail Yurievich readily agreed. It was on the 10th of April, 1837, that Lermontov finally set off to join his regiment in the Caucasus. Russian involvement in the Caucasus at this time was just as bloody an affair as it has been in recent years. Plus ça change. Although in his first exile, Lermontov hardly saw any active service, his exile was an eventful one, and not without adventure. He set off for Stavropol, where his new regiment was stationed. However, he very quickly succumbed to an acute attack of rheumatism and was given permission to travel to Pyatigorsk, a spa town, to take a cure. He was so ill that he had to be carried out on a stretcher. Lermontov spent May and June in 1837 convalescing in Pyatigorsk. He had earlier tried to write a novel based on his experiences, Princess Ligovskaya, Knyagina Ligovskaya, which he had never finished. He now resolved to rewrite his novel, but in a different setting. That's how he conceived Princess Mary, Knyazhna Mary, the main story in his principal prose work, A Hero of Our Time, Geroi Nashего Vremeni. Ekaterina Sushkova would appear as Princess Mary, Varvara would feature as Vera. A Hero of Our Time is an outstanding work of creative genius, and in it, Lermontov's brilliance as a prose writer is displayed to the full. The work consists of 5 short stories or novellas, which are interlinked by Pechorin, the common protagonist. Pechorin is a complex and fascinating character. Like Yevgeny Onegin, he is a superfluous man, lishny человек, not in tune with his age or the society in which he lived. Pechorin also reminds one of a Byronic hero. He is proud, energetic, strong-willed, and at odds with the world, and at the same time, embittered, cynical, and bored with life. A Hero of Our Time was a major breakthrough in Russian literature. Lermontov's masterpiece may be regarded as the first example of psychological realism in the Russian novel, which later on was developed further by Tolstoy and Dostoevsky. By the summer of 1837, Lermontov was cured of rheumatism and ready to rejoin his regiment. It was in early September 1837, on his way to join his regiment, that he had his first taste of adventure. He arrived at a wretched little town called Tamanya on the Black Sea coast, where he was quartered in a miserable thatched hut. The encounter he had there with smugglers, a beautiful girl and a blind boy, he described in his short story called Tamanya. This work was highly praised by Chekhov, who referred to it as the perfect short story. When discussing Lermontov's prose, Chekhov also commented as follows: "I don't know a better language than his. I would have taken his story and analyzed it as they do at school, sentence by sentence. This is the way to learn how to write." Many other writers have also praised Lermontov's gifts as a prose writer. Nikolai Gogol, for example, wrote as follows: "No one has yet written such sound, beautiful, and fragrant prose." Coming back to Tamanya, the story recounts how Pechorin, like Lermontov himself, was nearly drowned in the course of a nocturnal adventure, and how when he returned to his hovel, he discovered that all his money, his sword, and his Dagestan dagger had been stolen. However, there was one detail that was not mentioned in the short story. That is that in addition to Lermontov's own money, his sword and dagger, the letter to Martynov containing 300 rubles, which had been entrusted to him, had also been stolen. As we shall see later, this theft was to have serious consequences for the poet. Eventually, Lermontov joined his regiment, which was soon transferred to Tiflis, now Tbilisi, in Georgia. It was while he was in Tiflis that Lermontov heard the good news that the Tsar had signed an order for his pardon and his transfer to the Grodno Guards regiment at Novgorod. He also managed finally to meet up with Martynov. His first concern was to pay Martynov the missing 300 rubles out of his own pocket. Mikhail Yurievich explained how the letter and money had been stolen from him and apologized. One might have expected Martynov to be grateful for this, but instead he reacted very angrily and jumped to the conclusion that Lermontov must have opened the letter and read the contents, as otherwise he would not have known there was money in it. Lermontov shrugged his shoulders and laughed. But after this incident, Martynov became hostile to his former friend. In late November 1837, Lermontov left for his new regiment at Novgorod. When he finally got back to St. Petersburg, as a result of his grandmother's many petitions, Lermontov was restored to his former regiment, the prestigious Life Guards Hussars. This would mean that he would once more be based at Tsarskoye Selo, near his grandmother in St. Petersburg. The nightmare of his exile was over. And on his return to St. Petersburg, it seemed that he was now something of a hero after his exile to the Caucasus, and as someone who had dared to raise his voice in defense of Pushkin. He enjoyed a period of great social success and was invited to the high society salons from which he had been previously excluded. But despite his triumphant reception in society, Lermontov felt lonely and remained unhappy. He nostalgically reminisced about his idyllic childhood. He gave expression to this nostalgia and to what he called the healing memory of the Caucasus in the poem he wrote in 1838, which has become the most famous lullaby in all Russian literature. Cossack Cradle Song, Kazacha Kolibelnaya Pyesnya. This was also an unbroken period of great creativity. From April to December 1838, Lermontov worked on A Hero of Our Time and on his poem Daemon, the Demon. The Demon is Lermontov's most famous narrative poem. He worked on it for most of his adult life, from 1829 to 1839. The poem tells the story of the love of a fallen angel for a mortal. For many years to come, Lermontov's masterpiece would keep inspiring poets such as Bloch and Pasternak, painters like Wrubel himself, and composers such as Anton Rubinstein. Throughout 1838 and 1839, Lermontov continued to write some of his most beautiful lyric poetry. This included, amongst others, Malitva, a prayer. It was inspired by and dedicated to the beautiful and recently widowed Princess Maria Sherbatova, who Lermontov fell in love with, and she with him, in or around 1838 and 1839. We'll now read this poem. A prayer. In difficult moments of life, when sadness fills my soul, there is a miraculous prayer which I recite by heart. There is a blessed power in the music of its words, and it breathes with a strange and sacred beauty. A weight falls from my soul. My doubts are far away. I believe once more and weep, and everything becomes so light, so light.
Молитва. В минуту жизни трудную теснит цель в сердце грусть. Одну молитву чудную твержу я наизусть. Есть сила благодатная в созвучиях слов живых, и дышит непонятная святая прелесть в них. С души, как бремя, скатится сомненье далеко, и верится, и плачется, и так легко, легко.
Throughout 1839, Lermontov was being talked of everywhere as Russia's leading poet and as the sure successor to Pushkin. he was also making his name as a first-class prose writer. But despite all the superficially glittering social success, during this period, he remained dissatisfied with what he felt was the hollowness and hypocrisy of society. This culminated in 1840 in the writing of the poem, The 1st of January, Kievoye Yanvaria. The poem was another bitter and scornful attack on society and the establishment. Such was Lermontov's popularity with the editors that somehow the poem slipped past the censors and was published. Understandably enough, though, it angered and upset the aristocracy and court circles, not to mention Tsar Nicholas. An ominous development then followed. Pushkin's death had occurred 3 years previously, but there was still sensitivity in French circles about the poem which Lermontov had written on the death of the poet, in praise of Pushkin and in condemnation of Dantes. In late 1839, a query was raised as to whether the second stanza in Lermontov's poem, which excoriated Dantes, was directed against all Frenchmen or only against Pushkin's killer. Baron de Barante, the French ambassador, decided that the lines contained no offense to the French nation and invited Lermontov to a ball at the French embassy in January 1840. His son, Ernest de Barante, turned out to be Lermontov's rival for the affections of Princess Maria Sherbatova. Because of this, Lermontov and Ernest de Barante detested each other on sight. This ball, in fact, passed off without incident. However, at a subsequent ball in February 1840, their conversation ended with Ernest de Barante challenging Lermontov to a duel, which challenge he immediately accepted. It was agreed that the duel would be fought on the 18th of February 1840 at Chornaya Rechka, the site of Pushkin's duel with Dantes. Mongo Stolypin, somewhat reluctantly, agreed to be Lermontov's second. And so the duel went ahead. 2 simultaneous shots rang out. Lermontov fired into the air, and de Barante's shot was wide. The 2 opponents shook hands and departed, accompanied by their seconds. But when news of the duel reached the ears of the authorities, they came down very heavily on Lermontov. He was arrested and imprisoned in the Arsenal or Armory guardhouse. He was then court-martialed and stripped of his rank and privileges. However, following a tearful appeal by his grandmother, he was allowed to keep his rank, though he was transferred to the Tenginsky infantry regiment in the Caucasus. He was only released from prison on the 20th of April 1840, having been incarcerated for 5 weeks. It was in March 1840, while he was still under arrest, that a hero of our time appeared in the shops. Tsar Nicholas was furious when he read it. The Tsar was not impressed by the character of Pechorin. Such an inappropriate hero. It was with a heavy heart and full of premonition that Lermontov left St. Petersburg for the Caucasus in the spring of 1840. He joined his regiment at Fort Grozny in Chechnya in June 1840. During his second exile, he was to see action very quickly. At dawn on the 6th of July in 1840, his regiment set off on an expedition until it came to a position by the river Valerik. On the 12th of July, a bloody battle then raged all day between Russian and Chechen forces. The number of casualties on both sides was very heavy. During the battle, Lermontov displayed great cool-headedness and bravery, and was recommended for the award of the Order of St. Vladimir. The citations referred to the fact that despite the danger, this officer fulfilled his duties with admirable courage and coolness, and even flung himself on enemy positions with the first ranks of our valiant troops. Afterwards, Lermontov wrote a long narrative poem about the Battle of Valerik in the form of a letter to Varvara. Я к вам пишу случайно, право. I'm writing to you, alas, by chance. In this poem, his view of the futility of war is as relevant nowadays as it was in 1840. And in October 1840, Lermontov was put in charge of a detachment of irregular soldiers. These included Cossacks, Tatars, and Kabardinians. He eventually assumed command of a total of 100 men. He fully rose to this challenge, and after the third expedition with his detachment, was once again mentioned in dispatches. He commanded the men in his cavalry detachment in an exemplary manner, always the first to ride out and the last to rest. This brave and energetic officer several times earned the congratulations of the High Command. On the 30th of October, near the river Valerik, he once more displayed courageous coolness. In the margin of the dispatch, the cavalry commander in Chechnya wrote, "Proposed for the golden saber to be inscribed for bravery." It might have been thought that these splendid official reports of Lermontov's bravery in the line of duty would have impressed the Tsar, but the reverse was the case. Pedantically, the Tsar pointed to the fact that in going on this mission, the disgraced officer had not been with his own regiment, but in charge of a Cossack detachment, and so the Tsar spitefully refused to award Lermontov any honor. Meanwhile, thanks to yet more energetic petitioning by his grandmother, Lermontov was granted a period of compassionate leave with effect from January 1841. The poet arrived in St. Petersburg by early February 1841. However, his leave began badly. The day after his arrival, Lermontov accepted an invitation to a high society ball. Unexpectedly, both the Tsar and the Tsarina appeared. The Tsar's brother, who was the commanding officer of the Life Guards, at once caught sight of Lermontov. The poet had not appeared to realize that as a disgraced officer, he was barred from such occasions. He was ordered to make a furtive exit through the back door. This further act of provocation did not go down well with the Tsar, and Lermontov received a peremptory order to leave the capital within 48 hours and rejoin his regiment. On the 12th of April, 1841, the day before his departure, Lermontov went to a farewell evening hosted by Ekaterina Karamzina, the widow of the great historian Nikolai Karamzin. Lermontov took the opportunity for the first time to approach Pushkin's widow, Natalie, with whom he had not really previously spoken to. He had a long and earnest conversation with her and apologized for not having valued her enough before. He said that he would try to deserve her friendship upon returning to St. Petersburg. Natalia Nikolaevna, for her part, wished him well, and she later said that she remembered their conversation for the rest of her life. It was in a very somber mood that before his departure for the Caucasus once more, Lermontov composed his unpublishable farewell to the Russia of Tsar Nicholas in the form of 8 well-known lines. Прощай, немытая Россия. Farewell, unwashed Russia. We will now read this poem.
Farewell, unwashed Russia. Country of slaves, country of masters, and you sky blue uniforms, and you nation obedient to them. Perhaps behind the wall of the Caucasus, I shall hide from your pashas, from their all-seeing eyes, from their all-hearing ears.
Прощай, немытая Россия, страна рабов, страна господ. И вы, мундиры голубые, и ты, им преданный народ. Быть может, за стеной Кавказа сокроюсь от твоих пашей, от их всевидящего глаза, от их всеслышащих ушей.
Before Lermontov left St. Petersburg for the last time, in April 1841, his friend and admirer, Prince Vladimir Odoyevsky, entrusted to him an old and treasured notebook. He gave it to Lermontov in the hope that he would fill its pages with poems. The notebook was found after Lermontov's death, when it was returned to Odoyevsky. It included some of the best of Lermontov's poetry. On the 15th of April, 1841, Lermontov left for the Caucasus once more, via Moscow. He traveled south with his friend Mongo Stolypin, who had likewise been banished to the Caucasus as a punishment for his part in Lermontov's duel with Ernest de Barante. The two friends reached Stavropol on the 9th of May, 1841. While he was waiting at Stavropol with Stolypin to join their regiment, Lermontov wrote several poems. One of these was Vykhozhu Adinya na dorogu, Alone I Step Out onto the Road. This poem was later set to music and eventually became a much-loved folk song. Admiral Kolchak, the head of the short-lived white government in Omsk, who was executed by the Bolsheviks in February 1920, was said to have sung this song as he was led to his execution. We will now read this poem. Alone, I step out onto the road. The flinty path glistens through the mist. The night is still. The wilderness is listening to God, and star calls out to star. The skies above are magical and solemn. The earth is sleeping in a pale blue glow. Why then do I feel this grief and ache inside? Do I still yearn for something? Do I regret the past? No, I expect nothing more from life. The past I don't regret at all. I yearn for peace and freedom. I long to sleep and to forget, but not with the cold sleep of the grave. My wish would be to sleep forever, so that life's force would slumber in my breast, which would gently rise and fall. So that night and day, my ears caressing, a tender voice would sing to me of love, and above me, evergreen, a dark oak would bend towards me, whispering.
Выхожу один я на дорогу. Сквозь туман кремнистый путь блестит. Ночь тиха, пустыня внемлет Богу, и звезда звездою говорит. В небесах торжественно и чудно спит земля в сиянии голубом. Что же мне так больно и так трудно? Жду ли чего? Жалею ли о чем? Уж не жду от жизни ничего я, и не жаль мне прошлого ничуть. Я ищу свободы и покоя. Я б хотел забыться и заснуть. Но не тем холодным сном могилы я б желал навеки так заснуть, чтоб в груди дремали жизни силы, чтоб, дыша, вздымалась тихо грудь, чтоб всю ночь, весь день мой слух лелея, про любовь мне сладкий голос пел. Надо мной, чтоб вечно зеленея, темный дуб склонялся и шумел.
Also at this time, Lermontov's thoughts turned to Varvara. He wondered whether he would ever see her again. In his despair, he wrote another poem to her, Son, the Dream. Vladimir Nabokov called this poem a dream within a dream, Son Vasnier. It has also been called a vision of terrifying clarity. We'll now read this poem. The Dream. In the midday heat, in a valley in Dagestan, I lay motionless, a bullet in my chest. Vapor was still rising from my deep wound as my blood oozed out, drop by drop. Alone, I lay on the sand. Craggy cliffs crowded all around. Their yellow peaks were scorching in the sun, and I scorched too. But I slept the sleep of the dead. And I dreamed of glittering lights, of an evening feast in my homeland, where young women, garlanded with flowers, merrily talked about me. But one sat apart from the lively talk, lost in thought, and her young soul, God alone knows why, was immersed in the saddest dream. And she dreamt of a valley in Dagestan and the dead body lying there, of the person who was so dear to her. Vapor rising, a black wound gaping in his chest as his blood streamed out, growing cold.
Сон. В полдневный жар в долине Дагестана с свинцом в груди лежал недвижим я. Глубокая еще дымилась рана, по капле кровь сочилась моя. Лежал один я на песке долины, Уступы скал теснились кругом, и солнце жгло их желтые вершины, и жгло меня, но спал я мертвым сном. И снился мне сияющий огнями вечерний пир в родимой стране. Меж юных жен, увенчанных цветами, шел разговор веселый обо мне. Но в разговор веселый не вступая, сидела там задумчиво одна. И в грустный сон душа ее молодая, Бог знает, чем была погружена. И снилась ей долина Дагестана. Знакомый труп лежал в долине той. В его груди, дымясь, чернела рана, и кровь лилась холодеющей струей.
Lermontov and Stolypin then continued with their journey to their posting in Dagestan. Lermontov suddenly became taken with the notion of going to Pyatigorsk instead, and managed to persuade a rather reluctant Stolypin that they should decide the matter by tossing a coin, in a manner worthy of his own short story, Fatalist, the Fatalist. Lermontov put it as follows: heads, we rejoin our regiment; tails, we go to Pyatigorsk. Agreed? Stolypin agreed reluctantly. The coin came up tails. Lermontov leapt into the air, joyfully shouting, "To Pyatigorsk, to Pyatigorsk, Pyatigorsk, Pyatigorsk." They reached Pyatigorsk on the 13th of May. The two rented a small four-roomed house on the outskirts of the town, facing the slopes of Mount Mashuk. It was here that soon after, Lermontov wrote his insightful and bitter poem, Prorok, the Prophet. He also saw a number of his old friends in Pyatigorsk: Kornet Glebov, Prince Gagarin the painter, Prince Sergei Trubetskoy, Lev Pushkin, Pushkin's younger brother, and not least, his oldest friend of all, Nikolai Martynov. Lermontov was also delighted to renew his acquaintance with the Verzilin family. Madame Verzilin's home was a veritable magnet for the best society in the Spa, and was known as the Shrine of the Three Graces, thanks to her three pretty daughters. But Lermontov was by no means popular in all quarters. The town was soon divided into two camps: the friends of the poet and his enemies. His friends tended to include exiles like himself and the younger women. His enemies tended to be more on the establishment side. Against Lermontov's own expectation, Martynov was very much in the enemy's camp. Martynov had been in the Caucasus for 2 years. He had originally hoped to become a general, but decorations had not come his way. He had retired from the army, a disillusioned and envious man. He was also pretentious, and at the same time, somewhat slow-witted. Martynov made things worse for himself by going native in the style which Lermontov had parodied in his essay Caucasus, or Caucasian. He tended to dress for effect in Circassian style and carried the largest dagger a silversmith could make. He had not improved his looks by shaving his head like a Tatar. Lermontov mercilessly teased Martynov about his dress. He referred to him in humorous and deprecatory terms, "Eh, voilà le montagnard au grand poignard. Here he comes, the hill tribesman with the huge dagger." On the more positive side, Lermontov was overjoyed to find his cousin Yekaterina Mikhail staying with an aunt in the town, and he spent many happy hours with her. It should be said that Lermontov loved her, and not so much for herself, but because she was uncannily like Varvara. Lermontov wrote her a poem in which he expressed his appreciation of this resemblance. This was perhaps Lermontov's last poems. Нет, не тебя, так пылко я люблю. No, it's not you, I love so passionately. Meanwhile, resentment of the poet in the anti-Lermontov camp continued to grow. Matters finally came to a head on the 13th of July, 1841. Lermontov, Martynov, and their friends were spending the evening at the Versilins. Prince Trubetskoy was playing waltzes at the piano. Lermontov then took some chalk and with a few deft strokes drew a brilliant caricature of Martynov with his long dagger. Lev Pushkin burst out laughing. Prince Trubetskoy stopped playing. Just at that very moment, Lermontov's voice, saying the word dagger, resounded in the silence of the room. No doubt he had once more been ironically referring to the montagnard au grand poignard. Martynov was incensed by this and told Lermontov that he had had enough of his sarcasm. They continued to argue for some time, and then Martynov challenged Lermontov to a duel, which the poet accepted. Their friends didn't really think at first that the duel would actually go ahead. However, Martynov refused to back down. It was settled that the duel should be fought on the 15th of July at 6:30 in the evening at the foot of Mount Mashuk. It's believed that Lermontov's seconds were Mongo Stolypin and Prince Vasilchikov, and that Martynov's seconds were Mikhail Glebov and Prince Trubetskoy. Lermontov spent the first part of the day on the 15th of July with his cousin Katya Mikhaviets. When parting, he said to her, "Kuzina Dushenka, счастливее этого часа не будет больше в моей жизни." My dearest cousin, there won't be a happier moment than this in the whole of my life. And on the way to the site of the duel, Lermontov was in a cheerful mood. He remarked to Mikhail Glebov that his one regret was that he could not retire from the army. He had worked out the plots of a trilogy of novels, which he had hoped one day to write, which would have as their settings, first, Catherine the Great and the Pugachev Rebellion, secondly, Napoleon's invasion, and thirdly, the present war in the Caucasus. On arrival at the foot of Mount Mashuk, Lermontov and Martynov started preparing with their seconds. Lermontov then remarked to Vasilchikov in a loud voice, so that Martynov could not help but hear, "Я в этого дурака стрелять не буду." I won't fire at that fool. This was bound to incite Martynov. Lermontov and Martynov then took up position. They were barely 30 short paces apart. Lermontov stood motionless. His pistol pointed towards the sky. His other arm lay across his chest. It was absolutely clear that he had decided not to fire. Martynov advanced towards him. He couldn't bring himself to look Lermontov in the eye, but he held his pistol leveled at Lermontov's chest. Beside himself, Stolypin suddenly roared, "Fire, or else I'll separate you." Martynov then came to the barrier with quick strides and fired. As though struck down by lightning, Lermontov fell to the ground without even swaying or clutching at his wound. He breathed softly 3 times, did not utter a single groan, and died instantly. The seconds were horrified and rushed towards him. A gaping wound showed in his back, and blood was gushing through a hole in his chest. The vision of terrifying clarity, which had appeared in his poem, The Dream, had materialized. Vapor rising, a black wound gaping in his chest as his blood streamed out, growing cold. Lermontov's body was eventually brought back to Pyatigorsk. It was long after midnight by the time Dr. Barclay de Tolly arrived to register the death. The funeral took place in Pyatigorsk 3 days later, on the 18th of July. Death by dueling was considered a suicide, so a church service was not possible. But the funeral was conducted with the rites and ceremonial due to a Christian soldier. The whole town attended the funeral. Representatives of all 4 regiments in which Lermontov had served acted as pallbearers. The coffin was carried to a secluded grave in the cemetery at the foot of Mount Mashuk, near the place where the duel had been fought. When the Tsar was told of Lermontov's death, he is reputed to have exclaimed, "Sabakye, sabachya smert," a dog's death for a dog. The Tsar's sister, the Grand Duchess of Weimar, when she heard what her brother had said, was so horrified that she forced the Tsar to retract it. He then came back to declare in front of his courtiers, "Gentlemen, the man who could have taken Pushkin's place for us has been killed." Varvara Lapukina was so distressed by Lermontov's death that she was confined to bed for 2 weeks. She never got over Mikhail's death. For the rest of her life, Varvara was bitterly unhappy and suffered appalling health. She only lived for another 10 years and died at the age of 36 in 1851. It was nearly a month before anyone dared to tell Elizaveta Alexeyevna of her grandson's death. The news of this had a devastating effect on her. She never recovered from the shock. Indeed, she was so devastated by the news of her grandson's death that she wept so much that her eyelids permanently closed, so that she could only open her eyes by lifting up her eyelids with her hands or fingers. However, her petitioning to the Tsar was not yet over. Lizaveta Alexeyevna had one more request to make, that her grandson's body should be removed from the Pyatigorsk cemetery and placed in the family vault at the Tarkhani estate. This time, the request was not refused. The coffin containing Lermontov's body arrived at Tarkhani on the 23rd of April, 1842, and was laid to rest in the family tomb next to his mother and grandfather. Many Russian poets have died before their time. Pushkin, Blok, Mayakovsky, Gumilev, Yesenin, Mandelstam, Tsvetaeva, to name but a few. The death of Lermontov at the age of 26 seems especially wasteful. It leaves an overwhelming sense of unfulfilled potential. the thwarted promise of still greater things to come. Civic and philosophical themes, as well as deeply personal motifs, were closely interwoven in Lermontov's poetry. His legacy can be found in the works of Russian writers, artists, and composers, and in theatrical and cinematic productions. His dramatic life has itself served as material for many novels, poems, plays, and films. By way of concluding, and before we read our final poem, I'd like to read two excerpts from articles by literary critics. The first is an excerpt from the article Lermontov by the famous literary critic Yuli Eichenwald. There are people who all their lives represent an irreconcilable contradiction and sound a fatal dissonance. Lermontov started with this, but did not end with this. He started with Byron, but ended with Pushkin. Throughout his short life, Lermontov gravitated towards spiritual peace, towards wondrous simplicity, and he had to make a lot of effort to find beauty and depth in simple things. And through his constant striving, he eventually found them. In the wisdom of his heart, he grasped the religious meaning of life. He understood that the simple is not vulgar, that it is easier to soar beautifully over the peaks of the Caucasus than in the mundane valleys of life, modestly and industriously to live one's everyday life. For a long time, he asked for storms, and sultry storms really did rage in his chest. But after they had swept by and Lermontov had come home, where wonderful simplicity awaited him, after that, he was killed, and he was not destined to live at home. And now, like the hero of his poem Testament, he bows to his native land from his tragic grave, and his native land lovingly responds to its singer and son. The second quotation is from Vasily Rozanov. Lermontov creates a series of genuine prayers, original and creative, but not imitative. His poems, such as Alone I Step Out Onto the Road and An Angel Was Flying Through the Midnight Sky, are original and personal hymns. His hymns are tense, passionate, and restless, and at the same time, airy and starry. All of his lyrics as a whole, and each poem separately, represent a synthesis of his deepest personal feelings, which belong to him exclusively, but which immediately expand into vast panoramas. There is no poet more cosmic and more personal. Let us celebrate the fact that the spirit of Lermontov lives on through his wonderful verse and prose, which continue to speak to us today. We will end the evening by reading a poem by Bulat Akujava, which links the tragic deaths of Pushkin and Lermontov with the equally tragic fates of Russian poets of the 20th century. Берегите нас, поэтов, берегите нас. Take care of us poets.
Take Care of Us, Poets, by Bulat Akujava. Take care of us, poets. Take care of us. We have only a century left, a year, a week, an hour, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, no time at all. Take care of us. But remember, all for one, one for all. Take care of us with our sins and joys and without. Our own Dantes is wandering close by, young and handsome. He cannot forget his past damnation, but his destiny is to push the bullet into the barrel. Our Martynov is crying somewhere. He remembers the spilt blood. He is already killed once. He does not want to kill again. But his fate has ordained it, and the lead is cast, and the 20th century orders him to fire. Take care of us while there's still time. Only do not take care of us so we perish, like the care the Tsar's servants took of his hounds, or the Tsar took of his dog handlers. Protect us, poets, from dirty hands, from unjust sentences and shallow girlfriends. There will be many more poems and many songs for you. But please, take care of us, poets. Take care of us.
Булат Акуджава. Берегите нас, поэтов, берегите нас. Остается век, полвека, год, неделя, час, 3 минуты, 2 минуты, вовсе ничего. Берегите нас, но только все за одного. Берегите нас с грехами, с радостью и без. Где-то юный и прекрасный бродит наш Дантес. Он минувшие проклятия не успел забыть, но велит ему призвание пулю в ствол забить. Где-то плачет наш Мартынов, поминает кровь. Он уже убил однажды, он не хочет вновь. Но судьба его такая, и свинец отлит, и 20-е столетие так ему велит. Берегите нас, покуда можно уберечь. Только так не берегите, чтоб костьми нам лечь. Только так не берегите, как борзых псари. Только так не берегите, как псарей цари. Берегите нас, поэтов, от дурацких рук, от нелепых приговоров, от слепых подруг. Будут вам стихи и песни, и еще не раз. Только вы нас берегите, берегите нас.
That is the end of our presentation and reading, ladies and gentlemen. We'd be very happy to answer any questions you may have or comments if you wish.
Thank you, David. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, who is that speaking? Carolina.
No, it's Natasha Dickinson.
Oh, sorry, Natasha. Sorry. Oh, thank you. Yes.
It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yes. Well, I think all three of us, we do really appreciate Lermontov. Alla, of course, has known him from childhood, but Lucy and I were chatting earlier, and I think for myself, Lermontov was the first Russian poet who more, to start with, more than Pushkin even, who resonated. And I found his verse so easy to memorize, and I found it absolutely entrancing. I mean, there are other poems we would love to have read as well, but you have to make a selection.
I think Nyetya Nye Byron was the first one I learned, but I was still a child. I was a teenager.
Oh, sorry.
When I learned that, just so you know.
I'm not on the video. I just wanted, my name is Joyce Glasser. I just wanted to thank you for that excellent presentation. It was really great to get the context. I had read some of the poems before, but didn't know the context, and that makes a lot of difference. So thank you very much. I just didn't get the name of the author of the last poem, Take Care of Us Poets.
Oh, Bulat, yes, of course. Bulat Akujava, who was a great singer as well as a poet.
Oh, okay.
B-U-L-A-T,
Not
Bulat.
singer. He was performed his poems singing.
Yes, okay, but he sang.
Yes.
Yes, they call it a bard in Russia.
Yeah, bard, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, he's got his voice is absolutely beautiful. And well, again, just a personal account. When I started studying Russian, I found the pronunciation difficult. And one of my first teachers recommended that I listen to the songs of, or to Bulat Akujava singing. And I found the clarity of his diction and the melodiousness of his voice absolutely compelling. So if you can easily get his some of his recordings, and it's a delight to the ear and to the mind and to the soul to listen to him.
Thank you.
But your point is very good. I mean, the one theory about poetry is you dissect and analyze the text and consider it on its own. But really, I think with all poetry, it does help, and it enriches one's understanding and appreciation. If you know that it stands to reason, if a particular poem was addressed to a particular woman, in some cases, who Lermontov had been in love with, it helps to appreciate the meaning and the sense of the poem, and especially when it's not totally straightforward, as will have appeared. The account of his personal life, I mean, he was hardly a saint, and I hope that came through, that some of the treatment was atrocious. At the same time, I thought it important to draw attention to his incredible courage in battle. By the way, he was totally opposed to warfare. It's one of these strange things. He had direct experience of combat. He was fearless and obviously reckless with his own life, as he showed with his attitude to dueling. He didn't need to go ahead with that. And it's very un-21st century, the behavior of such an individual. I find absolutely riveting. And for me, it is truly tragic that he did not live longer, because say those three works I mentioned that he was hoping to write would have been wonderful. By the way, I'd have loved to have said more about A Hero of Our Time. I reread it in English translation before this talk, and it is utterly gripping. And what I found astonishing was, for someone so young, in his mid-20s, to have written such a work. It just shows such a deep level of understanding of human nature. And so there are some quite good translations, and you can appreciate the story and the ironic self-awareness of the hero, Pechorin, or the protagonist rather.
All right.
Thank you so much, everyone. It was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Can I say something?
Lydia, hello. Добрый вечер, Lidichka.
Добрый вечер. I think it is just super, so good. Мне хотелось бы только сказать, что это можно напечатать. You have to publish it because we have to. I see many of us want just to take it and read it again and go deeper and deeper, because in Russia we learn it from childhood, so we were absolutely open for that and we remember it still. But now in this age as well, it is different understanding, but it is absolutely marvelous. And I thought it could be published. You have so many lectures and this reading, absolutely beautiful. So it's not just for 1 hour and a half or 1 hour to read and forget, because it should be just with you all the time.
Oh, well, no, thank you, Lydia. But Pushkin House, they put it on, publish these talks. We've got several of these poetry sessions, and they're all published on YouTube, the Pushkin House YouTube site, so you can see them. And I'm very happy for my. Well, I think it's very important to circulate the text, both
Yes.
of the originals, by the way, as well as the translations, so it's available in that sense permanently. But I am hoping at some stage to publish something, a collection of talks about Russian poets with the original poetry and the translations. It might be of a bit of interest to people.
I think it is. The hard copy is just very, very precious.
Yes, but also I find with Lermontov, we have celebrated his life and work on previous occasions as well, and we come back to him from time to time. And each time we all find, well, I certainly find it, and I think Lucy does, that we understand more each time, and see different layers and levels in the poetry. So it isn't just a one-off at all. It's it remains with one, and it's inspirational. It is inspirational poetry, I think.
Absolutely.
If I could just say add one more thing. When you were, I totally get the argument between the T.S. Eliot that you should not use context and just analyze, but actually I refute that. And but in terms of Lermontov, he seems to have had a definite self-destructive streak. With his university. I mean, how can you go to change universities without even knowing if your former one your credits will be accepted? It's ridiculous. And then, with if he's a pacifist, joining the military and then fighting duels and everything. And I was wondering if the duel thing had anything to, and then also, I mean, at the very end, flipping a coin to desert your regiment and go somewhere else and have fun drinking. I mean, it's unbelievable he'd get into trouble for that again. But did his dueling have anything to do with his Pushkin and the comparison that he was the next Pushkin? Do you think, somewhere in the back of his mind? I don't know.
Well, but one can speculate. I would agree with all those comments. Yes, there was certainly a self-destructive element in his makeup. Absolutely. But he did not behave in a. So I mean, it's the opposite perhaps of a career civil servant who would do his or her exams. And then apply to a particular post and then work hard and be respectful to their seniors and not be late for interviews and this sort of thing, and would not take reckless risks. But I mean, he was the absolute antithesis of that.
Yeah.
What makes him in many ways so appealing. But but not a role model, because certainly his treatment of women, I mean, well, I don't want to go too much into this, but it's obvious it leaves a lot to be desired. How much of that is explicable by his upbringing? I mean, he may have been somewhat spoilt by his grandmother when he was brought up on her estate, and he lost his mother and father at an early age. But I'm simply not qualified to sort of probe into the Freudian antecedents of his subsequent behavior. But Alla is far more knowledgeable about these things. And Alla, you may wish to comment on that. Is there anything more to say than just judging him by his actions?
Sorry, I was lost in my own thoughts.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That's okay.
Okay, no, thanks, Joyce. Where are you joining us from, Joyce, by the way?
Oh, London.
Oh, London, I see.
Yeah,
yes, fine.
but I don't know Russian. I'm just interested in poetry and literature. Yeah.
Fine, yes. But by the way, can I just say this? Thanks to Zoom, and thanks to, again, to Pushkin House by broadcasting these or transmitting these talks, we have attracted comments from other countries, from people who appreciate poetry. We had a very nice comment on one of our talks, I think,
from all over the world, by the way.
Well, from Brazil, and then from
Chile,
from an American who lives in Sydney, Roger Pulvers, who is the leading commentator in Australia on Japanese culture. And I've been in correspondence with him. He translates Russian and Polish as well as Japanese.
Wow.
But he is a wonderful man, and he's very interested in, if you like, I suppose you'd call it cross-cultural fertilization, cross-cultural issues. And I've learnt an awful lot from him.
Yeah, and he translated Akhmatova and Yesenin also.
Oh yes, he's translated many poets.
Yeah, and Tsvetaeva, yeah.
Yes, I mean he's assured me he would attend these events, but the time difference it will just be absolutely the wrong sort of time. But he told me he was waiting to watch this when it goes out on YouTube, and he won't hesitate to make critical comments, I'm sure, if there's anything that he finds unbecoming. Is Dennis still around, by the way?
Yes, I am.
Fine. Okay, yes. I think for future talks, it would be good to mute everyone.
Yes, I've done that, but too late. I'm sorry about that.
That's all right, yeah.
Hi, thank you.
Oh, Roger, good evening. Hello, good to see you.
Thank you and Lucy and Alla for a wonderful performance this evening, and the whole event I found most beautiful and memorable. And I'm very glad to hear that you're thinking of producing some sort of collection of these talks that we can enjoy again. Ask a question.
Yes, of course.
Puzzled about one aspect of Lermontov, as to whether he had any real religious beliefs. His conduct suggests that he didn't, but some of his poetry does seem to reflect a belief in God and a belief in a goodness, and on his religious and moral beliefs deep down.
That's a very good question. I honestly don't know. I've thought about this. I mean, the poem Angel, the Angel, I understand from Alla was not permitted during the Soviet time. Is that right?
No, it has been published, but it hadn't been mentioned at school.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
School children had no idea.
Well, okay, but say taking the Angel, I don't want to sound pretentious, Roger, but for me, when I first discovered it, I thought it's the most beautiful expression of the notion of the contrast between the real world and the ideal world. And that the real world we live in is imperfect, and cannot be any there cannot be any comparison between that and the ideal world which we'd all love to have. And so I regard that as it could be Platonic idealism. I mean, I don't think he was a philosopher in that sense. So I honestly don't know if it was that or there was some Christian belief. I think it's ambiguous. Do you know, Alla, if he was a believer?
I just, if anybody wants to know, to know more about Lermontov's relations with God, I recommend to read the article by Merezhkovsky, Lermontov, poet сверхчеловечества. It is on the internet. I'm not sure that it had been translated into English, but in Russian, if you just click on Merezhkovsky, then Lermontov dash поэт сверхчеловечества, then it will, I think, will answer the questions of whether Lermontov was religious or just was fighting the religion, and also about his development in the philosophical and religious.
Okay.
Matters.
Well, Roger,
Yeah.
when we meet, Roger, let's compare notes on that. But can you enlighten us any further as to the conclusion one would then draw from that? Or are you just leaving it to us, Alla, to decipher it for ourselves?
No, but I just, it's expressed so beautifully, and it can't be said in 2 or 3 words. So
Okay, I know.
and it places a great, Merezhkovsky places great weighting, I would have said, on that казачья колыбельная, the Cossacks' lullaby. That so his conclusion, okay, is that Lermontov was reconciled with God through the mother of God.
I see. Yeah.
Because he has that Cossack lullaby and also the beautiful another молитва. Я Матерь Божия ныне с молитвою. Mother of God, I am now addressing you with my prayer.
Okay. No, thank you. Well, no, definitely that. Well, this is how one, by giving a talk, one then learns new things. I will definitely look that up. And
Actually,
yes.
can I say something?
Of course, Jennifer, yes.
I've got here something that's like photocopied from a book by Leslie Blanche, and she refers to Merezhkovsky, who takes a romantic view, writing of Lermontov's profound love of nature. He develops his theme that Lermontov was not all man, that he was part angel, part devil, a wandering, dispossessed soul who craved some earthly anchor, who knew himself doomed to centuries of past and future disembodied wanderings, tormented by some sort of prenatal memory, a vision or remembrance of eternity. I have lost count of my years, wrote Lermontov at 15, posing romantically. But was it entirely a fashionable pose? Again and again in his writing, he returns to this theme, to those shadowy, mysterious remembrances of another existence, of some immemorial past from which he would like to escape forever into the world of positive horizons. And he also recalls, well, Merezhkovsky says he recalls the Gnostic legend of which Dante speaks in the Divine Comedy, establishing a link between the celestial world and our own. That angels who've made their choice between the 2 camps have no need to be born. Sorry, do you want me to go on?
No, carry on. This is very interesting.
Time cannot change their decision, taken for all eternity. But for those who hesitate, who cannot choose between light and shadow, God has accorded a grace, that of being born into the world, so that they can make in man's time, the choice they could not make in God eternity. These angels are the souls of the newborn. The same grace which brought them to birth hides from them the eternal past. so that their hesitations and doubts in the past do not influence or determine in advance their decisions during that earthly sojourn, in which they must decide their salvation or perdition in the eternal future to which they will return. There's more, but I don't want to monopolize everyone's time, but it's quite interesting, actually, this bit that she quotes.
Yes, and sorry, where was that from, Jennifer?
It's from Sabres in Paradise by
Yes.
Leslie Blanche, which is about the Caucasian Wars, which actually Georgian told me were utter rubbish. I mean, if you'd like, I can photocopy it and send it to you if you've got an email address or something.
Oh, yes, I would, yes. No, absolutely, Jennifer, I would very much like that.
What is the title again, please?
The book is Sabres in Paradise. It's by an author called Leslie Blanche.
Thank you.
But as I say, when I was in the Caucasus and speaking to people there, they said that actually a lot of what she wrote was rubbish and inaccurate and so on. But, you know, I don't have any Russian and I can only speak, you know, I can only read things in English. But this bit struck me very, very much when I was reading it, because I just read Lawrence Kelly's biography of Lermontov.
Yes. Oh, that's very good. Yes.
So I was really very, very interested in this. But I mean, if you would like to send me your email address, or perhaps I can send it to your care of Pushkin House, if that would be easy.
I've just sent it to you, Jennifer.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No, at all. No, thank you. That's very interesting indeed. Well, no, because I think Lermontov will always be one of my main interests in Russian poetry. It really will. He really will. I mean, for all the reasons we've given tonight.
That's why it's been such a good talk, because it's so nice to have things put into context. I mean, you know, one reads about it, but it's nice to have things particularly pointed up, I think. And for publishing the poems, because, you know, you have to read them again to sort of get the full,
of course.
Yes. To try and get somewhere near the heart of them.
No, that's very kind. In fact, well, absolutely, because I wasn't. I'm not an expert on any of these things, but I simply love Russian poetry, and my passion is to communicate that love to others who are interested, and to go through the things which people often overlook by focusing on one particular aspect of a writer. Yes. And then just to bring these things together. And by the way, it's a fascinating. I know this story quite well, but even preparing for this evening, I was just entranced by it. I thought, this is absolutely extraordinary. And, I mean, I'd love to go to Pyatigorsk and to
go so would I.
Yes, absolutely.
But I would also actually like to have a really good exposition of his poem, The Demon.
Oh, yes.
I feel that when I've read it, I miss so much because I'm not au fait with all the mythology and the religious thinking that goes into all that. And I would really love to be able to explore that more. Well,
I think you're absolutely right. That sort of, you would need a separate talk devoted.
Yes, I quite understand this.
Oh, no.
In a talk like this.
Yeah. Or for the hero of our time, which I think is a fantastic work. Yes, by the way, the poems I do believe in. I also believe very much in showing the text of the original and one's own translations. It's incredibly difficult to translate Russian poetry.
I'm sure.
I mean, Anthony Wood, I know, is here tonight, who is the outstanding translator of Pushkin in the English-speaking world. I find Pushkin excruciatingly difficult to translate. Anthony does it with immaculate precision and delicacy. But somehow I found Lermontov, I'm not claiming any special credit for the translations, but I hope that at least they give some idea of the original. I mean, The Angel is very difficult to translate into anything like the same sort of form. But I somehow find Lermontov easier to translate than, say, Pushkin. But others can judge, and you can then dissect. I'm always willing to, Anthony and I have discussed translations many times, and Lucy and I discuss them together. It's always very interesting to have others' views on the way in which, in fact, and star calls out to star. I should say it was Anthony who gave me that phrase. I can't claim credit for having. I think it's just a beautiful phrase. In Alone I Walk Out on the Path, and star calls out to star. Just that, for me, that is such, it just resonates in such a poetic way. But it was Anthony who gave me that as the best translation of the Russian. Did you wish to comment, Anthony? I don't wish to force
Actually,
you.
you're muted.
Muted.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can hear you now. Yes.
we can.
David, I've been trying to unmute myself for the last half hour. Very unusual. Thank you very much for. I'm actually overwhelmed. That's another reason why I didn't chip in before. I found what you have presented very moving and very. It put together so much. One has read many well-known poems by Lermontov and sat back in one's romantic chair and wallowed in romanticism, but you have put the living context of how these poems were written. I had no idea of the extent to which you brought out that Lermontov acted so much against his own interests. You know, he didn't turn up for exams and so on, etc., etc. And this is I just didn't realize that. And he even, rather like Pushkin, didn't take duels seriously. The final duel he aimed up in the air, and most of Pushkin's duels that he started, he didn't intend to do properly, that they were almost a joke. So this is a curious gambling instinct that we seem to see in a number of Russians for some reason. I don't know. Anyway, but I ended up with the feeling from your wonderful riveting talk, David, that I've been maybe spending too much time on Pushkin, and I should now turn to Lermontov. Very difficult, as you say, maybe impossible to translate into riveting English for the reader today. I don't know.
Oh, I think.
In short, I was inspired by your talk.
Oh well, God, that's high praise. Now, Anthony, as I say, I would really say this. You have translated Pushkin to a very high level. I think you should be able to deal with Lermontov.
I can't remember where you got star from. I can't remember that.
It was from you.
Star to star.
And star calls out to star.
Okay.
It was not in relation to that particular poem, because it's repeated in a Dombrowski poem. And I think you gave, I'm sure you gave me that.
Did you show me translations of Dombrowski?
Yes, I think so, yes.
Yeah.
No, but we're all, I think you used the phrase, we're all toilers in the vineyard. So it's a cooperative enterprise.
Yes, okay. Yes. I got that from the famous translator of Yevgeny Onegin, before Stanley. I've forgotten his name, actually. The famous translator of Onegin before Stanley Mitchell.
Oh, well, there are so many. No,
there's only one.
No, Vladimir Nabokov.
No.
Joking.
No, I knew I'd be lighting the blue touch paper with that.
One forgets names. Anyway,
Stanley.
No, before Stanley Mitchell. No, I recently was asked to recommend to a friend of Roger Pulver's in Australia, who was giving a talk about Yevgeny Onegin, to list the best translations. So I did. I gave him about 6. I gave Vladimir Nabokov's, I gave Stanley Mitchell's, I gave Roger Clark's, and I gave
Charles Johnston.
Charles Johnston, yes.
Yes. His was the phrase, we all toil in the same vineyard.
Oh, was it? Yeah, yeah. I wouldn't say that's the best translation of
no, I didn't. I said the before Stanley.
Yeah, I know before Stanley, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but fine. But yes, that I think that self-destructive streak that Joyce Glasser referred to, that is a feature of Lermontov more than with Pushkin.
Certainly,
I wouldn't have said Pushkin had a self-destructive streak in the same way at all.
I know this is completely off the thing, but I remember when I did first read Lermontov in the Russian, and I read Hero of Our Time, and I fell in love with Pechorin before I ever fell in love with any human. And I was a teenager, and I saw Lermontov as a kind of self-destructive rock star, you know, who takes too many drugs but makes the most brilliant music. And the really weird thing is, many years later, when divine Amy Winehouse died, aged 27, I remember immediately thinking of Lermontov, because I always remember 1814 to 1841. So you said he was 26, but in my mind he had been 27. So there we are. I compare him to rock stars and Amy Winehouse, and just extraordinary genius, and yet extraordinary self-destructive impulses as well.
Yeah,
I'd agree with that.
On that note, I'm afraid I have to go, although I'm one of the hosts. So I bid you all a
no, thanks, Lucy. Wonderful to see you in such great form. See you soon, I hope, in London.
Absolutely, absolutely.
In person, as they say.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bye then. Bye. Thanks, Alla.
Thank you.
Yes, I think it wasn't self-destruction, because they didn't want to be in the straitjacket. It is just a sense of freedom and passion.
Yeah.
Didn't know that this end like that, but they wanted to protest, and they were very passionate. That's why it's a lot of music about it. They all put on the music, on lyrics.
Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. Dennis, shall we bring things to a close, do you think?
I mean, I feel that the conversation is so dynamic and lively and exciting that it's a pity to finish it.
Oh, well, let's carry on then. Let's carry. I didn't want to curtail it.
Yeah, it's good.
Well, let's see if there are any more comments, perhaps.
Oh, sorry, it's me again. I've got to go too, but I wanted to just ask you, I know I can listen to it now on YouTube, but what was the short story you said that inspired Tolstoy?
Oh, the poem. It was a poem.
Oh,
a poem on the Battle of Borodino.
Okay.
Short poem.
It's a poem. It's called Borodino, about the battle, and that inspired Tolstoy to write War and Peace, in which, of course, the Battle of Borodino is one of the great events in War and Peace.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So he wasn't inspired just by the battle, but by the poem about the battle.
Well, he might. One can't say it was only that. I mean, it was a huge issue. The Napoleonic invasion for Russia, an existential issue.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Joyce, for all those comments. It's very helpful to have these. I mean, these sorts of comments and questions. Because on Zoom, of course, one doesn't know, one can't sense how the audience is reacting at any stage.
Well, your presentation was I liked so much the way you spoke at a great pace for people listening to new information, and you articulated, because over the past year, I've listened to many Zoom talks, and some of them I've just stopped listening to because the people, professors, and with loads of titles after their names, they just don't know how to talk to people, and they mumble and they put their voice down and whatever. but your talk was very clear, and I appreciate that.
Well, that's no, incredibly helpful to have that. No, it is an issue. One has to. I'm conscious of that because I do a lot of Zoom meetings, and it is an issue. So that's helpful to have that feedback. Oh, there's a question recommending a hero of our time from Patricia Davis. Well, the Penguin version that I have, which I found very good, is by Paul Foote. Paul Foote, that's Foote, published by Penguin in 1966. It was first published. It was reprinted in 1985. So that I found that perfectly serviceable. I found that a pretty good, and I have compared it with the original. But that's certainly one I know, but I'm sure there are others.
Hello, good evening.
Oh, hello, Yaroslav. Yeah, hello, good evening. Good evening.
I tried to be connected previously, but
yes,
I wasn't successful.
Yes.
Yaroslav, thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
I just pressed the button mute, and now I can see that I can be heard.
Yes, you can be heard. Yes.
Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. Thank you to you, David, for organizing this event, and to Alla for her beautiful presentation. I love Lermontov very much. Lermontov and Dostoevsky are my favorite from Russian classic. And I believe I actually disagree with saying that Lermontov was self-destructed. I believe that in poems of Lermontov, you can find more food, spiritual food,
yes,
rather than in poems of Pushkin. I believe, this is my opinion, that he was really spiritual, and he understood very well the nature of demon, as you can find the poem Demon, but there are actually two poems of demon, and also of angel. I believe that he believed in God. He was spiritual, but his life interrupted very briefly, very shortly. He lived only 27 years, and in that period of time, he managed to give us so much, and this is very surprising for me. From where he could find so much spiritual information to give to us. Previously, a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, I traveled to Georgia because some of my relatives used to live there many years ago, and I know that Lermontov also visited those places, and his poem "City" was born there in Georgia.
Yes, yes.
And I kept repeating his words from this poem. This very beautiful poem. So maybe some of you haven't read this poem, so I advise you to read. It's very beautiful.
Yes.
I don't know how well it is translated into English language, but in Russian it's really beautiful. I mean, not only beautiful, but
which poem is this?
You have to be very talented to create such a work. Yes, so he's something much more than just
Could you say a line in Russian?
Mtsiri.
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 What?
I think
Mtsiri.
During this, yes,
exactly.
Мцыри.
Немного лет тому назад, когда сливаясь и шумят, обнявшись, будто две сестры, струя рагвы и куры. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I believe that Lermontov, for that time, he had a very strong sense of freedom and also about the justice as well. And maybe his personality couldn't match at that time, and that's why his destiny was so complicated, and he was exiled many times. But after this event, I will read more about his life story, because many things I didn't really know about his life. Thank you.
No, thank you, Darzov. No, I will definitely look at Siri. And I think the demon is as well.
If some of you haven't written Siri, I believe you know half of Lermontov, even less. So your knowledge about Lermontov are not really completed. So
no, I understand.
Yes.
No point taken. Very much. No, we have a lot more work to do, but it's a horrible place.
If we are allowed.
And, there is a translation in English.
Well, I'll do it if there's not
Yes.
one. No, it's a challenge.
It's not really easy to find this translation. If someone is interested, I can.
Yeah, we could have a subject, Lermontov's narrative poems.
I agree with Yaroslav because it is very contemporary, freedom and oppression.
Yeah. No, that could be the title.
But
yes, or these
not
the subtitles.
self-destruction, not self-destruction at all.
Well, no, but these are all views. I mean, these are all views. I mean, his behavior at the duel when he was killed by Martynov, he didn't have to do that.
He didn't think that Martynov will just point at him because he didn't want it.
No, but he didn't care. It seems he didn't care whether.
No, he did. He did.
I think, Mr. David, I think some very, very extremely talented people, in some ways, maybe they provoke their destiny. They provoke, and it makes them leave some situations where they can deeply understand the life. This is the explanation that I can give. Of course, he's not perfect. His behavior wasn't perfect in society. Because you know, I believe much of the energy of these people is towards the inner world. You understand?
Oh yes.
Yes.
No, I understand very much. No, there's a lot of rich.
So very talented people are not really, are not very perfect people. So talented, they have weaknesses. They have a lot of weaknesses. So Lermontov had some weak side, bad side of his personality. Yes.
Well, we accept that. Yes. Oh yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I tried to present a reasonably balanced portrait, not to shy away from those, but overall we have a poet who is a genius, both as a prose writer and as a poet, and a very interesting life on any analysis, whatever the internal motivation.
It is a bravery. He was very brave.
Well, I agree, absolutely. Yeah, the record shows that. Incredibly brave.
On this high point.
Sorry. Okay, thanks, Yaroslav. And see you soon, I hope.
Yeah, we'd like
hopefully we will meet when things.
Well, let us hope.
Repeat.
Well, no, repeat. No, we'll have
encore. Yeah.
Dennis, I hope we can have another poetry evening, obviously on a different theme or a particular angle on Lermontov or another poet, perhaps, or another poetic theme.
I just suggest people who attend just to write to the Pushkin House what subject they wanted.
But we would
very
like
good idea. Very good idea.
This has been tremendous success. So thank you, David. Thank you, Alla, and please come up with any new ideas, and we'll be happy to accommodate.
Okay, it's good to repeat again the whole evening just all event today is exceptional event, exceptional.
Should we call it a day?
Yes.
With regret, with regret.
Definitely with regret.
No, but may I thank Dennis, seriously, may I thank Pushkin
Thank you
House
very much.
for hosting us.
Oh, welcome.
Without you, we couldn't do this.
Yeah.
So we do appreciate that.
Thank you for saying that, but you've done all the work, and I mean, you've been amazing. Thank you for that.
Yeah, but you steered it.
Have a great evening, everyone, and happy for attending, and definitely see you next time, and please follow our newsletter, and we'll be happy to see you next time.
Okay,
thank you for time. Thank you for time to extend it.
Yes, thank you for that, and see you on Thursday at the book prize event.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. Spokojnej noci.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you for coming.
Good night.